Hi, I'm Karen Brunson, president of NATS, and I'm very glad to introduce this next session. I have such an affinity with both Dana Lentini and Ginevra Williams about how the voice changes. And that's what they're going to talk about today for the child singer. So children will listen, teaching the child singing in the private voice studio. I first met Dana Lentini when she visited Northwestern because her son Luke plays violin and is an incredibly fine violinist. And we had the longest talk about her upcoming book, which is now being released. She is really interested in the child singer, and I am very in favor of children learning how to sing well throughout their lives. I first met Ginevra when she texted me when my own book was coming out and said, "We are both using the same terminology, the evolving voice." Well, yes, indeed we were, and we celebrate that together constantly. So she and I have met now, both at the Voice Foundation and at PVOC. Now, you can read more about them in their complete biographical information, and it can be found in the digital program book and about these sessions, and it's also listed in your guidebook app. I want to remind you to put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring that and writing them down and coming back the last 10 minutes to bring some of those questions forward to our presenters today. So now sit back, relax, turn off those electronic devices, and you are in for a real treat. Dana and Ginevra.
Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful welcome, and thank you, Nats, for hosting us. We're so excited to see you all virtually. I am Dana Lentini, and thanks for joining this session on teaching the child singer in the private studio.
Hi, I'm Ginevra Williams, and I have been teaching children for about 35 years. And I did my doctoral research on the health and development of children who were being trained at an elite level. I was looking at choristers in the English cathedral system. So I've been working with children at all levels of their development for a long time. I'm very pleased to be talking to you today.
And so we're going to divide up and share some helpful information with all of you, whether you're currently working with children or curious about working with children. Hopefully this presentation will leave you with some new strategies and some food for thought. So when working with children, I like to think of them as blooming and growing. And so a good place to start is planting little seeds. So I'm going to start with unleashing some new ideas from old traditions. And from the moment a child is born, they use their voice for communicating their needs. And once they begin to understand and communicate language, young children find the ability to vocalize in a musical way. Since children are born ready to use their voice, why do we not expose them to cultivating it earlier on? In modern culture today, parents are interested in exposing their children to various sports and musical activities at very young ages. It's not even unusual to see little ballerinas in ballet class when they're barely out of diapers. So why are we not inspiring children to take voice lessons when they are already using their voices? And why aren't more teachers feeling comfortable working with children? And why do most teachers really shy away from that idea? So going on to our next slide, there are many myths surrounding teaching children. And some of those myths are, number one, it's dangerous and could cause oversinging to the delicate young voices. Number two, you can't teach them technique because there's this old notion that singing technique is only reserved for after they've gone through puberty. And number three, There's that myth that children's attention spans are too short and they can't focus for an entire lesson. Number 4, children are only interested in singing beyond their years because of these powerful influences from media that shape kids' ideas. And many believe that somehow they're uncoachable until later, which that doesn't really make any sense because then they're just forming bad habits that are harder to break. Many teachers are fearful of kids wanting to belt and model pop stars and imitate adult singers, so we're often steering them away from private voice lessons and into other instruments to lay that foundation in music, mainly piano, and that suggestion of, join a choir until your voice matures. You've probably heard some of those. And another myth is that belief that choir and instrumental lessons are the only route to developing musical proficiency and the musical ear. But my belief is, won't kids sing anyway if they're left to sing and use their voice in an unhealthy manner? It could actually cause more harm without guidance and understanding. So I really believe that it's because of these myths, and it's that reason we need to start connecting with these younger singers. So how did we get here? So let's take a look at understanding the master-apprentice model, which actually goes way back in our history, but just looking at the 20th century when conservatories were the main training ground for elite singers, and master teachers only worked with the advanced and matured singers, leaving behind beginners and prepubescent singers until their later teens to begin their formal training. Children were then left to sing at home, by themselves, with their families, in the general music classroom, or in choirs. And during the 20th century, in the music classrooms, the song approach became the focal point in music education. So there wasn't an emphasis on singing technique, but just kind of learning the artistry of the songs, which is good. And then the only tone production that was taught to children was straight tone singing and head voice only singing in order to achieve that choral blend, which many believe was the only way a child could safely sing without ruining their voices.
So in order to understand why children's voices are different from adult voices, we need to look at their development really from the outset, because the newborn baby has got a very, very different setup. The needs of their voice and their vocal mechanism are very specific for their survival, and they're quite different from those of a young child and a teenager and an adult. So when we know why they are born with such a different structure, we then know how that structure develops through childhood from the age of about 1 up to the start of puberty. And that development informs the way that we teach them and what we know they can and can't do. So let's start by looking at a cross-section through the infant and the adult vocal tract. So the picture on the right, that's our familiar look through the adult vocal tract. There's the tongue there and the chin here, the jawbone. Here's the roof of the mouth, the soft palate, the pharynx here, and here is the larynx, here the vocal folds, and this is the epiglottis. So this is our familiar picture. Yes, we know our way around this one. So the infant, how is that different? Well, everything is a lot more compressed. Yes, it's a lot closer together. The tongue is a slightly different shape because the tongue really is there just for swallowing at this stage. Soft palate is in a similar position, but then let's look at the larynx. It's right up here. It's right behind the jawbone here. Very, very high up. And the epiglottis here overlaps with the soft palate. They're right next to each other. In the adult, they're a long way from each other. So why is that useful for the newborn? Basically, it makes feeding a lot more efficient. If the epiglottis and the soft palate can overlap like that, when the baby is suckling, it can get milk into its mouth. It can take 3 or 4 sucks before it swallows. While it's suckling, it can breathe in and out. So it means that it can take in far more food in a shorter space of time, which is essential for its survival. The high larynx is also much better at valving. So when we swallow, the newborn has to be able to swallow very, very well from the outset, or it's a threat to life. So it's pretty important that they have that in the best possible way. So here we've got a larynx that's really good at swallowing and a system that's very good at eating, at getting lots of food in. So what can't it do? It can't make the range of vocal colours that we make with our voices because it's got a really short vocal tract. So it is not a system that would be any good for speaking. Let's look at the differences in the larynx itself. So here's the adult larynx with the cartilages of the larynx here. And the infant has got all the same bits, but it's again much more compact. The thyroid cartilage here is right up underneath the hyoid bone. So there's far less flexibility for movement there. The arytenoid cartilages are proportionally much bigger. So again, they're better at valving, but they're not so flexible for different vocal colours. And the vocal folds themselves here, the cartilage in the infant comes about halfway down the vocal fold. And the third thing to look at is the lungs. Obviously, a baby is smaller than an adult, so it's going to have smaller lungs. But in terms of proportion of body size, they are much smaller. And that is because we need lungs big enough to enable aerobic function. We need to be able to run for potentially for hours on end, and to have enough space in our body for that gaseous exchange to happen, to enable aerobic activity. Now, the infant doesn't do that. It needs more space for food. Simple as that. So less space for air, more space for food. So the infant's breathing rate is about 40 to 50 per minute, whereas the adult breathing rate is about 15. So the infant will not be able to sustain long vocalizations. Now, you listen to a baby cry and it's only vocalizing for a couple of seconds at a time. Whereas we will vocalize for 5 seconds, maybe up to 15 seconds on very extended vocalizations. So very different needs and very different functions. So if the infant is designed primarily for suckling and for attracting attention, the adult vocal system is designed primarily for speaking and singing. All right, it's adapted for that. We're also pretty good at swallowing and eating, but it's a little bit of a compromise. With the lower larynx, we're not quite as good as we would be with a higher larynx. So the important thing to know is that the child is somewhere on that developmental journey. No changes happen overnight. So from the age of about 1 year, right up to the start of puberty, those changes will be developing incrementally. We will hear the lengthening vocal tract. We will hear the tongue learning how to make more sophisticated articulatory gestures. And we're really good at hearing those developmental changes in voices. If I play you recordings of children at different ages, you will be able to guess how old they are because you're hearing all of those changes. So let's try that. Here's the first one.
There was once a young rat named Arthur who could never take the trouble to make up his mind. Whenever his friends asked him if he'd like to go out with them, he wouldn't say yes or he wouldn't say no. He would only say, I don't know. He can never learn to make a choice.
So if I could do a poll of everybody now who's watching this and ask you how old that child was, you would probably say about 4 years old, which is the age of that child. You're hearing all of those aspects of development in the sound that child is making. If I asked you if it was a boy or a girl, you would be about 50-50 right, because at that age you can't tell. That is a boy, but there's no way that you can tell that from the sound of that voice. Let's listen to another one.
There was once a young rat named Arthur who could never take the trouble to make up his mind. Whenever his friends asked him if he would like to go out with them, he would answer, "I don't know." He wouldn't say yes and he wouldn't say no either. He could never learn to make a choice.
So immediately, you know that's an older child. And you may guess that is a child of about 10 years old. And you've probably got a better idea of whether it's a girl or a boy. And that is actually a boy, 10-year-old boy. And it is the same boy as the 4-year-old, obviously 6 years later. What you're hearing is the longer vocal tract, the ability to articulate better. He's sounding a little bit bored there, but he is reading something that he's not particularly engaged by. So here's another recording.
There was once a young rat named Arthur who would never take the trouble to make up his mind. Whenever his friends asked him if he would like to go out with them, he would only answer, "I don't know." He wouldn't say yes, and he wouldn't say no either. He could never learn to make a choice.
Now that's a child of the same age, but it's a girl. And you can hear that that's a girl's voice. Now the interesting thing there is that there is no structural difference at all between girls' voices and boys' voices pre-puberty. They're exactly the same structure. The differences that we hear are cultural. That is, children learning to speak in a particular way to sound like their perception of how they should sound. Cultural and gender stereotyping happens from a very young age. Of course, once puberty starts, then we do get significant structural differences, but that's the subject for another talk. So these differences, as they develop through childhood, we can see what the impact is on the voice. This chart here, I think, is a very useful chart, very useful guide. It is averages, so there will be children whose vocal range lies outside this. But the speaking pitch, which is the cross on the chart, shows us that in very young children, it's significantly higher, and it gradually drops down. The filled notes are the speaking range, all right? The unfilled notes are the extended singing range. Now, the lowest note is always about a third below your speaking pitch, and that's the same for every human. That your lowest comfortable singing note is about a third below your speaking pitch. And that's a very useful test to see if somebody's speaking in the right part of their voice, for one thing. It also shows us that if you've got children who are 4 years old, preschool children, you can't sing songs that go below middle C. They will not be able to sing those notes. So you have to choose keys that these children can actually sing in. The other implications of these developments are, as well as the pitch range, the larger lungs will give you longer phrases. The muscle development and those cartilages changing in proportion will give you greater coordination. So that enables not only more complicated melodies, but pitch jumps, being accurate, and faster notes. So those things come in gradually and incrementally over time. So what do we do when we're doing singing with children? Whether they're in a choir or whether they are in a one-to-one lesson, what sort of things are we talking about? Well, we will talk about how to sit or stand easily. All right, that's not a big deal, but it's very useful to know. it's very useful to know where and how to breathe. So that is where to breathe in the music, so that we're not breathing in the middle of a word. But it's also which bits of your body are going to be moving when you breathe. And why do children always do this when you ask them to take a big breath in? Because they want to show you that they're doing something. They want to show you that they're working hard. They want you to see that they're breathing. So that's one thing that you can calm down immediately. We teach them how to sustain a sound to the end of the phrase. We teach them how to make that sound clear, how to make the text clear, and how to make themselves heard. Now, all of those are actually learning vocal technique. They are not sophisticated, difficult concepts, but they are learning technique. So that tells us what technique is. Technique is just learning to perform the task with the minimum of effort. It's about efficiency. And when we're efficient, we're more economical with what we're doing, and then we're more effective. So learning singing technique is essential, really, if you want any child to enjoy what they're doing and to do it well.
Great. So let's take a look then at the ways we can structure voice lessons for children and why I think we need more than just that 50-50 vocalizing and repertoire format in a lesson. As Ginevra pointed out, we need to think about what we do when we teach children to sing. Children need to have a foundation in a variety of technical skills, and they need more than just vocalizing and singing repertoire. There's those concerns over damaging a young child's voice, but that can be avoided if we keep that check and balance in place regarding intensity and duration, which are the key factors and should be kept in moderation for children. They can be taught when to use various sounds for emotional effect, and they can be taught to feel and experience what healthy and efficient singing feels and sounds like. Children should be aware of what weak and under-supported singing is like. I talk to my students about a word that I use called tonus. And tonus is kind of like stability and stable and efficient sound. So it's not weak and it's not forced. It just has that nice stable feel to it. And then that way, when they're overproducing their sound, if they've got this perception of what singing should feel like, then they can sense what intensity is and when they're getting vocally tired. Just this past week, I was actually working with one of my students, and she's very expressive, and she was really starting to sing to her edge. But I've taught her to know that when she produces that kind of intensity with too much duration, it can wear her out. So she on her own kind of, recognized that she was going too far. And she's actually very well versed in a whole variety of styles and repertoire. And she was able to discern for herself that she was at her max. I think it's really important to get children to know their own voice. That's why I believe that children's voice lessons need to learn a variety of skills, and it's more than just vocalizing and repertoire. They need to know a lot about music and about themselves. Next slide. Thank you. So first, let's learn a little bit more about them. We, again, learned from Ginevra about the physical characteristics of the child singer. And then also throughout childhood, kids are going to evolve through these other areas of development, including cognitive skills, social and emotional skills, speech and language skills, and fine and gross motor skills, and of course, life skills, that responsibility and independence. So being aware of these points of development can help a teacher have better command with singers of various ages and stages. And these areas of development evolve, and the children will have different ability levels and different perceptions at different stages. So if a child is struggling with a certain difficulty in a task, their ability to shift and evolve is very high compared to adults. That's one of the things I think is that joy working with children, is having that ability to help guide them through just an easy transformation into their adulthood vocally. Our next slide is talking about some lesson pacing then. So how can we guide children to evolve through these changes and pay special attention to their needs? And that's why I believe lesson pacing is really important. And I break down these different skills and tasks by using a variety of different strategies in my 5-step system in my lessons. The areas that I focus on are mind and body warm-ups, breath and posture, musicianship training, then vocalization, and then repertoire. So our next slide, we're going to start with looking at just some mind and body warm-ups that young singers need to understand, because they need to understand that their body is their instrument. And so we need to get the body moving. We need to get their mind ready to receive information. I'm often hearing from those voice teachers that aren't accustomed to working with young children that they struggle with wiggly and inattentive children, and that's what frustrates them the most. But it's really interesting because kids can focus. 45-minute lessons with really young kids can go really fast if you just redirect that physical energy. My focus then is to apply kinesthetic warm-ups that encourage that movement, that finds pliancy in the body, and establishes focus and mindfulness. We do some child-friendly stretches, copycat games like Simon Says. They're all really helpful to not only warm up your mind and body, but you can also kind of instill some good singing habits and musical concepts. In this photo, I have actually one of my older singers. She's age 12. We're doing some standing things, but with some of my tinier students that are shorter than me, I usually like to go sit on the floor, and so we can be at eye level with one another, and it just gets their focus right on me. So we'll start with some echo exercises, and that can include some, beat motion, pitch matching, all while they're paying attention. For example, one of the little exercises I might do is I will, just get them started on a steady beat. We can use percussion instruments or just our hands. And then I'll ask them to echo me. So I'll say something like, engine, engine, number 9. And then they're keeping that steady beat and they just repeat that. Engine, engine, number 9. And then I'll say, going down Chicago line. And then they repeat that back. In a warm-up like that, we're getting eye contact. We're working on keeping a steady beat. I can change the tempo to see how well they stay with me. I can evaluate their articulation and enunciation skills. And then building from there, I'll move into some echo songs with pitch matching. And then all that time, they're paying attention, they're having fun, we're using our body, and now we're ready to talk about some breath and posture. So our next slide, regarding posture and breath, the first thing they need to achieve is that body awareness and alignment. Getting length in their spine, getting them to feel space in between their shoulders and their ears is a really good starting point. And then once they begin to understand how their body moves for singing, then they can start to explore breath motion. They can begin to discover how breath comes in and how breath goes out. As Genevra pointed out, if you ask a child to take a deep breath, they always kind of have this, tendency to just, engage and get that tension into their body. So getting them to just feel that motion is the starting point, that foundation to breath. In this picture, I have a prop. I love using props. I use lots of props in my lessons. Toys and props are so helpful and fun. And even my adult students get to use the pinwheel. In this photo, he's using a pinwheel and he can just feel his breath motion and how he brings in the air and how he uses stability in his breath to make the pinwheel turn. And then we'll go on to our next slide. So after spending about 5 or 10 minutes on each of these first 2 steps, then it's time to give way to some oral and written musicianship skills. I think musicianship training is one of those areas that's often left out in that lesson scenario, that 50-50 vocalization repertoire. And there are a variety of skills young children should and need to develop to become better overall singing musicians. So some of the things that it involves would be interval training, written and oral skills, including beat motion, rhythmical concepts through movement and practice. This is in this picture is one of my little younger students. Like I said, we can sit on the floor, so we're at eye contact. She's using some sand blocks, which for that engine number 9, we'd probably use some sand blocks for that. I have a little basket filled with fun percussion instruments, and the kids they love to use these, things where they can use their hands and touch things and feel things and choose things, because every week they want to choose a different one. And I've also achieved a lot of success by using a solfege system with the Kodai hand signs, which are a fabulous introduction for young kids to hear and feel pitch placement. During this time in the lesson too is a great time to incorporate a workbook series. And for me, I love the Full Voice Curriculum by Mim Adams and Nikki Loney. They're both here in attendance at the convention, so check them out. They have amazing and wonderful resources for teachers working with young singers. So our next slide is that next step, which is vocalizing. Now we're ready to put all of these foundational skills to work while exercising the full range of the singing voice. And my personal approach is to build strength and coordination. And again, as Ginevra pointed out, it's about those 3 E's: efficiency, economy, effectiveness. Young and beginning singers must start by understanding the variety of efficient vocal qualities their voice can make. And these qualities include high and light sounds, low, dark sounds, rich, bright, nasally sounds, everything in between. And that's where working with children is so fun, because they love to create these sounds. They have so much fun and freedom because they don't have that fear of embarrassment. In this photo, I have one of my students. He's just got a piece of yarn. I just snip off about 12 inches piece of yarn and we'll put it on the floor or on a music stand and just shape it into whatever they want. They can even throw it up in the air and let it land on the ground. And then we'll just trace that line with our voices and do pitch exploration, which is just a great starting point. Right now, of course, we're all virtual. We're teaching online. We're on Zoom. So I'm using the Zoom whiteboard, which the kids love. They love to get on there and draw their lines all over. And that way we can explore all kinds of great functions to their singing voice. And then we'll go into vocalizing, a whole assortment, and whatever that student has and needs to develop that efficiency is, where we lead into from there. So now their mind, body, everything's all warmed up, and now they're ready to explore some repertoire, which is that last and final part of that voice lesson. And there are so many skills and fun things that children can gain from learning great songs, but finding and agreeing to proper song literature is the key to successful work with kids. So what is appropriate repertoire and why is it necessary? As I was mentioning earlier in the discussion about myths and issues with working with children, repertoire seems to be that cornerstone of the argument against working with children. And children are often inspired by the songs they hear, and they're not always exposed to age-appropriate singing. Around the home and around the community, children are exposed to the music their parents enjoy, and it's often not children singing songs, but grown-ups singing songs. So the first step is to improving awareness by working with the families to help them encourage their young singers to listen to, other types of singing, especially children singing. I think when a young student is taking lessons, it's really important for them to hear and appreciate the vocal sounds that emulate the type of singing a child should be trying to achieve. And it's not to say that they can't explore a wide variety of styles in song literature, but just like a child who studies other, disciplines, whether it's piano or ballet or sports, it's really important that they don't skip steps to building and developing a good foundation in flexibility and strength to supporting their muscular system. A young ballet dancer who's very talented and very elite, if she attempts to perform beyond her years, that could cause lasting damage. And it's a voice teacher's job to build technique for those 3 E's: efficiency, effectiveness, and economy, to help avoiding any injury. In our next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we choose and then teach songs. So how do we pick appropriate repertoire that can serve the technical needs, but also inspire them through these strong influences? When we consider the main reason for singing, which I believe is the purpose of expressing and storytelling, then we can begin to consider how children can enjoy this beautiful art form of artistic expression. Children should not only be encouraged to sing within their vocal capabilities, but it's best to introduce them to vocal literature that they can relate to and express on an emotional level. So the song should have definitely expressive lyrics that a child can relate to and they can comprehend. And in addition to that, the vocal range and register shifts should be within their current ability level. And attention should be given to the tessitura to ensure that it lies well within their comfort zone. And then I have this, what I call text quantity, which is that actual number of words in an individual song. As a child develops, we need to take these things into consideration because some songs contain very lengthy text and have really complicated form, which can be really difficult for young singers to memorize and comprehend that lengthy, drawn-out story. So starting with just simple form is a good foundation. And then I have text quality, which are the lyrics of the song, that they should be, words that contain phrases and, words that a child can relate to in their young life. So they should be able to pronounce to the best of their ability and understand what they're singing about. And then lastly, lyrical phrasing and vocal line. Considering all ages and abilities, I think it's really foundational to begin with teaching lyrical phrasing. When they sing in stepwise motion and with syllabic phrasing, it's very easy and most conducive. It also helps them to develop that sensitivity to musical phrasing and can help with their breath stability within a phrase because, as we pointed out, their lung capacity isn't as large as an adult's, so they're going to need to take more breaths within phrases. So as we've mentioned other skills, baseball, piano, football, even math and school subjects, students don't make strong demands in the skills they're about to learn. They don't attempt to design their own learning process, and I believe it should be that way with singing. I think it's good to involve the young singer in making song choices, but it should be up to the teacher to encourage and inspire appropriate repertoire. There's always that typical challenge, happens all the time, when that child wants to sing the song that's out of their appropriate level. And I believe a teacher needs to be very knowledgeable and confident in their own ability to make that discernment. If a particular song, it might be within their capabilities, but we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye out that they're not risking any injury due to that intensity. And we also have to be careful that we're not exposing them to any inappropriate text. I do a lot of cross training with my singers, and I do try to introduce a variety of song literature. And when I, start a student, it's always really good to just start right from what they're good at and what they're comfortable singing, and then build from there. I think, I try to, meet them where they're at and then introduce them to that wide variety of sounds and singing functions. So then they can discover their authentic voice. I think it's really important. It's really exciting when I have young singers that come to me and they're set in their ways. There's like one style, one song, one singer that they want to sing. But when they have that enlightenment and they discover ease and new skills in something they never thought to explore, it's pretty powerful. So now that, we've taught and learned some songs with our students, let's look at some performance opportunities for young singers. Many children singers come to lessons because they've been recognized as very elite, very talented. Maybe they've been cast in a musical. Maybe they're already performing on the professional stage and they're looking for some vocal coaching to guide them. Working with gifted singers is very inspiring, but what I have found is a lot of children are coming to singing lessons because they're just drawn to music and singing. Their parents tell me they just hear them singing throughout the house all day long, and they want to explore voice lessons as a new hobby. And at times I used to say, oh, they need to take piano lessons first. Until I opened my own eyes to these possibilities, it's so fun now to work with kids in this capacity. And, a lot of them are not looking to perform on a stage, and a lot of them don't want to sing in choirs. So how can we help cultivate their skills by performing? Some of the things that I do with my students that are not doing regional and community theater stuff is we do studio recitals, we do master classes, music competitions. There's certificate programs like the RCM. And of course, there's community outreach. Having date-specific goals for performing really encourages children to have a growth mindset. It's really important to have that goal in mind for all singers. And usually those goals kind of include that crowning achievement by performing. Some of the other things that I do, actually, how I got my start with working with kids was working in small and large group singing classes. I find it really helpful for those shy and timid singers. Maybe they're not ready for one-on-one lessons, but they just love to sing. And singing in a group can be a great introduction for beginning singers that love to sing. And then they can be inspired by singing in a collaborative way with their peers. Another way of performing is now in our virtual existence. Many of us teachers have cultivated the virtual recital. Wow, that was a big undertaking that I did with my students this past couple months, but it was really enlightening for me and my students because they got to make solo self-tape videos at home. We made group compilation videos, and it just really opened our eyes to some really fun and innovative ways of learning more about our singing. So there are wonderful ways to encourage children, but having that plan, knowing how to succeed, is just a great way to empower experiences while cultivating that singing growth mindset for children. So in our next slide, our final wrap up, I just wanted to outline just some of the benefits for voice teachers and students. I think that promoting healthy singing habits will ultimately result in better technique and skills as these young singers matriculate into college and professional singing careers. They'll have a better understanding of healthy vocal habits, even if they're going to be non-professional voice users of any capacity. One of the other really great benefits of working with younger singers in your studio is that continuance in the private studio. And it promotes greater consistency. When you have a singer that comes to you in first grade, you can keep them for 8 years before they head off to college instead of just 3 because they started after puberty. So it's wonderful to have that continuance in your studio, and it really can lead to wonderful mentoring. You have these younger singers watching the older singers, and they can all become inspired as they progress through these very formative years. I think that it really helps lay that better foundation when we work with younger singers to help them through puberty because they can have more ease and function during this period of growth. And of course, there's those benefits for emotional well-being. Singing has proven to raise endorphin levels. And then, of course, like I keep saying, I think it's really important for students, young and old, to find their authentic voice, and starting them earlier is really a benefit for that. And then on our next slide, some more benefits. I think that singing, is great when we're coaching those elite singers, but we can also really educate those curious singers and lead them to that higher standard for artful singing throughout the lifespan through a variety of styles and techniques. As voice teachers, we know many of the advantages of our overall emotional and intellectual well-being from singing. So children gaining more exposure to these benefits, I think, will certainly enhance not only their lives, but our global community as well. Knowing to work with a diversity of ages and stages opens the teacher up to more possible clientele and increases revenue. And then one of my biggest perks, I think, for teachers working with a diverse group of ages and abilities is teachers themselves become more intuitive, wiser, and resourceful by discovering the many ways that singing voices evolve.
So I'm going to wrap up by going over some of the ideas that we had at the beginning about why people are slightly nervous or anxious or unsure about teaching children. And I'm going to use a sporting analogy. Dana and I obviously have been having conversations about all of we have conversations about all sorts of things. And we have a shared love of swimming. Now, if you're going to teach a child to swim, do we show them some water to play in and tell them that we'll be back when they're older to teach them technique? Do we just say, oh, we're just having fun, so you choose which exercises and which strokes you do, and don't worry, you don't need to practice because it's just fun? Or do we say, no, swimming's really dangerous because you might drown, so you go away and do some dance lessons and come back and swim later? Of course not. Of course not. We get straight in the pool, we teach them technique, we teach them drills, we get out the floats and we play games and teach them how to swim properly. And it's the same for teaching singing to children. Learning to sing well is making it easier, more enjoyable, and longer lasting. It's a skill for life. If you learn it early, then you're set up for your whole life. And so if we're going to teach these skills to youngsters, we need to teach these pedagogy skills to our developing teachers and younger singing students. So this is why this needs to be part of any pedagogy curriculum in college, how to teach developing voices through the lifespan. If you want to know more about this, Dana and I both have books. I have a book and a DVD, which is called Teaching Singing to Children and Young Adults. And Dana's book is just about to come out. Watch this space. It's going to be released very soon. And we now have about 8 minutes for some questions. So I will switch off the slides and we will see if Karen has any questions that have come through for us while we've been talking to you.
I certainly do. What a wonderful presentation. And for me, as I'm getting my questions ready here for you, I teach classical adult lessons primarily, but I also teach a lot of older adults, and I don't think I grew up. So I just got my ukulele again, and the child in me has been woken up here, and I love working with children. I do want to say to everybody that this is being recorded and that it will be available to all registrants of the conference for 6 months. And you will get something in your emails later on with an access code to all of the presentations from this incredible conference. Somebody wants to know, how can infants be so loud even with those tiny bodies?
It's to do with acoustic efficiency. And they choose a very small pitch range in order to get that acoustic efficiency. All right, we have to get our vocal projection over a big pitch range, a couple of octaves. Infants don't do that. They just zone in on the bit that they know will really pierce your ears. They're very good at that.
Attention getters, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Another question is the practice time daily and how they should practice is a question that's here too. And go ahead.
That's a really great question, and it's in my book. But no, seriously, and I actually have a little practice chart in there because I break down my lessons in those 5 different, steps. I really believe that there's certain things that they can do in each of those steps. With young children in my studio under the age of 8 or 9, they have to have a parent has to accompany them in their voice lesson. And so in that way, the parent is taking diligent notes of what the student is doing. If there's the workbook, they can work on some of the things in their workbook. They can, with their pinwheel, everybody takes that pinwheel home. They all get a pinwheel and they get to take it home. They can take that little piece of yarn home and they can work on that. That's that very developmental. And each of the different ages and stages has different techniques that they can do. But I don't think that singing at that age is, no, it's not a 30 minutes every day for, 6 days a week. I think they can break down and do all kinds of things. One of the things, as I pointed out, is listening. So they should be practicing singing, should be listening and listening to their songs. One of the things that I have my children do, they have to draw pictures. They, if I ask them if they're working on how much is that doggy in the window, I'll ask them, can you color me a picture and bring it back to me next week? So practicing isn't just standing and singing, vocalizing. They're exploring a whole variety of things. So it's kind of broken down into different things. I don't think it's just, again, it's not the way we think of vocalizing and working on our repertoire. They can speak their text. They can do all kinds of things. So I hope that's a
remember
little
taking
helpful.
my son to a Gordon method thing when he was 3 years old, and they were learning different rhythms, and so they would go bum 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 ba 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 bum bum ba 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 ba, and so I did it afterwards in the car, but I didn't do it right. And my 3-year-old son said, no, that's not what it was. And I learned then to follow his cue, and he did it right. So pretty wild.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of, somebody was wondering about what are the benefits of one-on-one time with somebody, and how important is it to be careful who you choose to spend time with your child?
Well, I would say that anything that you're learning to do, I mean, whether it's playing the violin or singing or doing your soccer training, the better the teacher, the better the outcome. So it is important to get somebody who knows what they're doing and has a really good rapport with your child. Good teaching. One-to-one means that the lesson can be crafted exactly for that individual. There is a great benefit also in group lessons. A skilled teacher can do groups of 2, 3, or 4 children and really capitalize on that peer learning experience. And the outcomes can be really, really creative and very positive. So there is value in both small group work and also in one-to-one lessons.
I remember my mother going along for like 5 lessons a week when I was a child for all sorts of things. And that's another question is, this comes from Grace Gorey. Any tips on educating parents about appropriate rep? I have a parent who keeps pushing the adult Disney rep for his kid. Cool.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I touched on that a little bit, right? I think one thing is, standing our ground. First of all, as teachers, we need to just come across as, knowledgeable and hopefully get them to respect our opinions. But I think also when I am working on a song with a child, I will go on YouTube or whatever, and I'll put together playlists. I'll send them links of a whole different categories of, whether it's the adult singing it, the child singing it. One of my secret tips is, Hal Leonard does the online vocal competition, and you can find all kinds of great videos of kids singing these songs. And if you just go into YouTube and look for a song and you put in Hal Leonard vocal competition or HL vocal competition, and you can find all kinds of kids singing. I try to send things like this to my singing families. I ask them to go to concerts. They need to be taking their children to go see and hear a variety of performances, because that's what I was saying. I think that the adults, they're listening in their car to their favorite music, and their kids are hearing that. They're not hearing kids sing. So I think that we need to continue to address this and I think talk about this more. It's a great conversation going forward as voice teachers, how we can encourage just better listening choices for children.
And I'll just bring forward one more question. And I'm going to add my own little spin on this. I know when my child was learning to sing at the age of 8, he started recreating a vibrato that was sort of a little pulse. It didn't seem to be a problem at all, and it was cute as heck. But the vibrato in children's singing, and you talked about Ginevra, you talked about the British choral tradition of restricting the vibrato. So what can the child vibrato healthily sound like?
Well, it's an interesting topic, actually, because I don't think that children pre-puberty will sing with the natural vibrato that an adult voice has. I think if they sound as if they have a vibrato, they are imitating a wobble. And that might be effective.
That speaks about me then, you know.
Yeah.
My son was imitating me.
Yeah, he was. And that can be effective, but it's not what we would call an intrinsic vibrato that you would hear in an older voice. And it's one of the pointers towards puberty is when we start to hear that vibrato emerging, that means that voice is maturing, and it's to do with the structure of the vocal folds. It's to do with the emergence of the vocal ligament as an integral part of the vocal fold structure. It's not something you can argue with. It's just the way that we're built. So by all means, they can play about, but it's not going to be a natural intrinsic vibrato if they're little.
Thank you so much, Dana and Ginevra. I am so inspired by this, and knowing the physiology behind it, how the brain works, how you engage them so cleverly. This has such a strong future for all of our NATS members. Thank you.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you very, very much.